Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Dark Rhino Security Confidential. Today, we have a superstar guest with us. We're really honored to have him. He doesn't need much of an introduction. He is Karim Hijazi. Karim is the founder and CEO of Prevailion. He is the host of the podcast, The Introverted Iconoclast, which we'll talk to him a lot more about. He has been in infosec since the 90s, so ton of experience, former director of intelligence for Mandiant. He's been on umpteen news outlets. You've probably seen him 1,000 times. He's a serial entrepreneur. In fact, his second company, Unveillance, they were so effective that they disrupted the malicious operations of the hacker collective Anonymous, who were not too happy about that. But thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show, Karim.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
You know, we get several entrepreneurs on here, and they're all characters.
Yeah,
I don't mean that. I mean, I'm one myself, so
yeah.
I know that profile well. But there's always such an interesting story, and I look at your background, and you have done everything from government work to consulting to working at some of the most prestigious cybersecurity companies in the world, and then built your own ecosystem. And what's your driver? How did you get into being an entrepreneur? I really want to know that.
Yeah, really good question. And funny, I don't get that question as often as you'd think. Not as direct.
Really?
Right? I get a lot. Yeah, it's interesting. I get a lot of folks that ask very specific, targeted, well, why did you do this specific thing, or what drove you to do that? But not the broad. And in fact, that's kind of a good question, because it segues into why I started the podcast and some other things that we'll talk about. But yeah, I think there are probably two or three things that are really key to my motivation and drive with this. And one of them was I watched my father, who was a businessman, do some pretty interesting stuff. Now, what's fascinating is it wasn't positive. I was upset with my father.
Oh,
I was upset that he was busy all the time and he was working on things. And, it was the classic father-son scenario where it's like, can't you come play ball or fish with me? While, no, I got to go work, Dad. Dad, like, sorry, son, can't do it. So funny enough, for a very, very long time, it was, work and pursuit of money and all that was not a positive thing in my life growing up. It was the reason for not having the time I would have liked, as I think many, many people have in the background sometimes. What's ironic is that many years later, when I finally started to come around in my early 20s to saying, I probably need to make some money. This is kind of silly.
yeah.
I need to go and figure out something. I did go and re-engage with my father and worked with him briefly. In fact, that's one of my first pivots into competitive intelligence, otherwise known as corporate spying, was with a company that he was working with. And so funny enough,
Wow.
Full circle to that. And there I was, kind of happenstance into that role of what turned into my consultancy, all sort of spawned from going and being curious about what my father did. And then even a stranger turn of events, my father never wanted me to be entrepreneurial. He's like, look, I've worked my butt off to get to a certain level in life so that you don't have to do this sort of slog. And I'm like, but it's in my genes, for God's sake. I want to do this kind of thing. So very interesting, very long sort of involved thing. And a lot of it was probably some sort of validation need with sort of having him see me as a viable person in terms of similar to him, that could go and build something myself. And then once that faded, it became very addictive, as you well know. It's something that when you get it right and you capture lightning in a bottle, maybe once, maybe twice, it's incredible. There's nothing like it.
It is, and I think you're ruined.
Yeah.
You can't go work for somebody.
God, no. Completely
it's
ruined.
Over.
Done. Absolutely.
But that is such a fascinating story, and I think it is. In my own experience, it has a lot of similarities to mine. It has a lot of similarities to a lot of other entrepreneurs. In fact, while you were speaking, I don't know if you remember the song "The Cat's in the Cradle."
Oh man,
but
legendary,
legendary, yeah. Right? totally comes full circle, right? I
It
mean, in
does.
the end, the child grows up to be like their parent. And I think maybe I'm getting a little off topic on this, but maybe we've lost a little bit of that in this world today.
I would agree. Yeah.
And I don't know if that's a good thing. It's children, if their number one role models become their parents, in a lot of instances, I think that might lead to more good than the bad.
Oh,
And we've
couldn't agree
lost a
more.
little bit of that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's why the answer is a little different than what you hear in the generic answers of, oh, well, I knew I wanted to make a ton of money and I wanted to be, rich and I had these ideas. Well, that's all there, but that's not the driver. The driver is an emotional driver. The driver is something that gives you some sort of feeling and, and like we talked about, you don't have that feeling until something works. And then when something works, it's even that much more catapulting into the next phase of things. So per your statement about cats in the cradle, my kids are doing what I did to my dad, which is, well, can't you do this? I'm like, no, sorry, I'm busy. And I was doing that for many, many years. And now I'm finally changing that methodology around, actually, to be honest. So I'm shifting from being so explicitly focused on work to focused on personal well-being and things like that, which is a big thing that gets forgotten about a ton with entrepreneurs as well. So that's that could be a whole show in its own right, by the way.
It absolutely can, and we'd love to discuss that. We've had some very interesting topics in that regard, and it's a big part of entrepreneurship. I mean, when you look at it, there's one thing to have the knowledge in the area in which you're pursuing, but I think even bigger than that is dealing with those fears of failure, jumping into the unknown. You're betting on yourself. In fact, since we're there, I got to ask you, do you have any advice on that for anyone that's thinking about taking a huge step in that direction?
Well, it's one of those classic situations where if you have it in you and you're willing to take the risk, because that's the part that a lot of folks don't get past. They think themselves out of the opportunity.
Yes.
I have a friend of mine in particular. I talk about him a fair bit on these podcasts that I do either as a guest or as a host. And it's funny. It's ironically funny because he'll call me with an idea that's good, at least in first glance. It sounds like a good idea. And I'm like, that's great. Go for it. He's like, yeah, but but what if that happens? And then if that happens, that'll happen. And then if that happens, then I really can't do that. And then literally 30 minutes into the conversation, he's convinced himself out of doing it. And it's sad because he's done this several times. And if he had just pursued it one of those times, who knows? He may have actually kind of gotten the momentum and the inertia to keep it going. I look as very personal advice, and this is not any kind of financial advice from me, but I say take the leap because this is experiential at minimum. You have an incredibly interesting experience trying to start companies and driving things forward. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Most things don't work in the beginning, as we all know. It takes several attempts to get somewhere. So I couldn't agree more. People that are listening that are on the precipice of starting, I say jump, because it's terrifying, but that's where you feel alive, frankly, when things do start to work. Or the worst that happens is you go back to what you were doing.
That's right. I mean, if you look at it in that regard, I was going to say, is failure such a bad thing? In fact, can you even succeed without it? I've said that many a times. I'm sure the listeners are tired of it, but
very true,
is
though.
it really possible? Is it possible? So tell us about the Introverted Iconoclast. First, that's an interesting name.
Yeah, it's a mouthful.
Yeah. How did it come about? And what's your mission there? I mean, what are you doing with this thing? What are you trying to do?
So the name is indeed a mouthful, but when you peel apart the words, and funny enough, as much as it wouldn't seem like I am an introverted person. I kind of
really
play an extroverted person on TV, literally, like what we're doing now. And I think people have a misperception sometimes of introverted people as shy and completely sitting in the corner, wallflowers. Yes. There are probably extreme versions of that may be considered that, but no, I think my version of introversion is two things. It's being more reserved and more ingesting versus, egressing information in many cases. You wouldn't believe so from my podcast, but that is actually a huge part of an intelligence operation, is listening more than you're speaking in many cases. So that actually came in handy as a character trait with my work. And I also don't particularly like ruffling feathers, which is really a problem, because if you're going to get anywhere in the world, you're going to eventually irritate somebody or something in order to be a change maker, which is the definition of an iconoclast, at least the modern version of the term, right? I'm not.
And you've definitely ruffled feathers.
I have. So all my attempts to not do it have failed miserably, and I've become more of a extroverted disruptor than an introverted iconoclast. But my intention was to always be someone that was a change maker, but did it in a very diplomatic and non-wave making way, which is very hard and almost impossible. So I like the contradiction in terms. It really defined my character and my intention from the beginning of when I started everything I wanted to do. And that's how it came about. So it's a very long-winded story for the titling of it.
No, but it's really cool that because we would never guess that about you. I can tell you, having seen you on the news so many times, having seen you in so many places, I'm like, there's no way Karim would. I would never have pegged you for an introvert,
Right.
But
it's interesting.
That it's very interesting. So is the show, what are you focusing on, the nuts and bolts of cyber, or is it?
No, and I'm not actually, which is interesting. So the origins of the podcast, believe it or not, are not as, they don't start glamorous, but they end up a little bit more so.
Okay.
Originally, I was like anyone else, started to see that podcasting was starting to manifest as a really powerful medium for delivering information, or I don't know, marketing a company, a product, a person, whatever the case may be. So literally I said, all right, I called my marketing team. I talked to my CTO at the time. I'm like, start a podcast for the company. Just go figure it out. I don't know. I don't listen to podcasts, quite frankly. So this was kind of funny. So I was like, go do it. And they didn't do it. Back to startup life where, usually you do everything at some point and or have to do something at some point because no one else is going to do it. So they didn't do it. I asked them again. They didn't do it. And I was like, okay, fine. This can't be that difficult. So I did a typical podcast thing. I got all the equipment in the world that you don't need for a podcast. And I had,
but it was fun buying it.
Oh, it's fantastic. I looked set up. I had the switches and dials and mixing boards. I was like, the hell am I going to, anyway, all that set up.
You should see Emily's room.
There you go. I was playing Emily, which I should not be doing. I'm not a producer. Right. And, you don't need that for a one person kind of situation. And, I didn't have the Joe Rogan experience in front of me with a bunch of guests sitting at the table. But what was interesting was I did the classic thing, even as a seasoned entrepreneur. I got all set up and then I stared at the empty mic and I didn't have anything to say. And then I started to figure out, like, okay, well, let me start talking about some things. And I did a couple recordings that were nuts and bolts recordings. They were they weren't technical, but they were boring. They were just nothing you wouldn't hear elsewhere, and nothing you wouldn't hear in my interviews with media, which I have to be pretty structured and scripted in some cases with those. So I was like, why would I want to put something out like this that you could probably just catch me on Google or YouTube doing, right? Not even mine. And that's when it occurred to me that I always wanted to do some sort of a memoir of what's happened, what we'll talk about through this episode, right? And I thought, this is a good medium. Let me try that out. And so literally the first, I think, 4 or 5 episodes of this podcast was a basically recollection and storytelling of my career, of how I got to where I was in sort of short form. So little vignettes of what happened, literally everything from jumping from a bartending job to literally being a corporate spy inadvertently, not even intending to get into that world, then turning into a counterintelligence pro, and then moving into cybersecurity. And so I did it over the course of, I think, 4 or 5 episodes, and I was hooked on my own podcast. So I got excited.
That's very cool.
And that's how it all came into being. But to answer your question a little bit more deeply about where it's going and what its purpose is, I think it's still coming into focus because I did indeed move into interviewing folks similar to what you're doing. And I get some really interesting people. They're not necessarily cybersecurity people. I think I've had, quite candidly, maybe 2 people in the entire span of this podcast. One is Arsnake, if you know who he is, from White Hat
Yes.
Security, and then now
Yes.
he's over at Tenable. Really, really amazing guy. If you ever get a chance to talk to him, and then Rob Lee, a good friend from Dragos.
Yep.
So
I
yeah.
listened to that podcast.
Yeah, it was good.
That was
fun.
that was an interesting one.
Yeah.
And we've had I'll tell you, we've had laughter yoga coaches on. We had the brand
awesome.
manager from Procter and Gamble on. We've had New York Times best-selling authors.
Yeah.
Because while they may not directly be in cybersecurity, there are concepts that they're putting forth that are absolutely relevant. When you look at counterintelligence and you look at understanding your adversary, getting into their mind and creating defense in depth, those are big, broad brush conversations. They're not
Agreed.
pure nuts and bolts. And I think they're a lot about mindset in many ways. And if the mindset doesn't exist, the execution is going to be pretty mediocre. And we see a lot of that out there in the industry.
Yes, very much so.
So yeah, please do that. I think that's fantastic. I'm going to tune in. I'm going to subscribe to yours to see what's going on. And quite frankly, the other thing is that there's so many cybersecurity podcasts out there. Right. And it is in many ways, it's such a dry topic. It's the one thing I've been brainstorming with Emily and with some of our other marketing team members is we got to get this to a place where people are going to want to tune in. And I think that for the 50, 60-year-olds, unless they're truly interested in this and are going to we've lost them. But I'd like to get the younger people to listen in and develop that mindset. And if they develop that mindset, it's going to naturally lead to a safer world, maybe not a perfect world, but a safer world.
Oh, great. Yeah, no, true. And I think to your point very quickly, on a podcast, on cybersecurity podcast, there's a dichotomy because cybersecurity is probably the most sexy, glamorous, rock star part of IT.
It is
collectively, right? And it's the more interesting stuff. However, you still have to get to a subset of it that is a little bit of, I'll be very candid, where I think I live, because I don't have a boring day in my world, as we'll talk about. Those are the stories that are more what people kind of think it's like from either Hollywood as it's conveyed it, to the masses, and certainly in more recent times where headline news has made it just a common known issue. So finally, it's coming to that point where people are starting to go, yeah, that's scary, and the fear factor of it is there's an excitement with that as well. So it's terrifying, but also exciting. But there's not that many of us in that world, right? And then you even further dissect it away between government and private sector, and you even further reduce down and whittle down to maybe just a few folks that really have an interesting life on a day-to-day basis. So you're right. It's unfortunately not as common to be able to have folks that have these types of stories, and then certainly have them manifest in the form of a podcast is again another reductive effort. So you're right. I don't know that we're going to have a whole slew of them, but I think there'll be some for everyone's kind of flavor profiles, depending on what they like.
That very cool. So let's tell us a story. You got mentioned in the book We Are Anonymous. So what led to that? What's the backstory on this?
Oh man, yeah. So thank you, Parmi Olson. I love you dearly for writing that book. So in 2000, this goes back a ways. So 2008-9, I was involved in some work that had to do with pursuing some botnets back then. And for those that don't know botnets, because I know you have folks that aren't necessarily cybersecurity folks. Botnets are a computer network that has been ad hoc'd together by adversaries. They've deployed things like malware onto machines through a variety of methods, and those machines become zombies, and they all speak to a command and control environment that the adversary controls. And they essentially build an army of zombified machines out there to do their bidding. Back then, really, it was less about information gathering. It was more about denial of service attacks, which is essentially having all these machines call onto some central point, some server somewhere to shut it down.
And they're still prevalent today.
Yeah, it still is, absolutely. So it hasn't gone anywhere. It's just they've added to the toolkits that they now, are able to use these botnets for. And that led to the founding of my company called Unveillance, which, as you may have mentioned in the preface of the show, resulted in getting acquired by Mandiant, which is a whole other story there. But leading up to that event, I got Unveillance going in a really good way. I had a lot of inertia, and I was really kind of spearheaded an offensive effort. And I'm very careful with the way I frame those words, because the minute I say offensive within the community, they all freak out. And it's true, because it is a very, very delicate topic, because offensive implies that you're hacking back, in an environment where it's either nation state or it's cyber criminal. And sometimes you don't know what the target is that you're responding against. It could be an innocent
Karim, is it
party. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is it really hacking back, or is it getting to be proactive? Because when you look at even the SANS Institute put out the the investment scale of cybersecurity, the last block on that is proactive. Aggression.
It's both. This is the problem with our industry with lexicon. People get wrapped around the axle on words, right? So you're entirely correct. My version of what I consider what I do is proactive, and it's impacting infrastructure of the adversaries, but it's done in a very, very specialized way, which leads me to the story. So we were taking down infrastructure, namely command and control environments of bad guys, indiscriminately in 2011. When the company was in full motion forward. They would not have been
happy about that.
No, they were not. Well, no one was ever, the bad guys, the whole gaggle of them that we were impacting, whether they were nation state actors or they were cyber criminals, were not happy with us. Well, it just so happened that we took down part of the infrastructure that LulzSec had set up to attack some of these environments. And so in doing so, all of a sudden their systems went offline, and they're like, wait, what? And they went digging around to see what happened and realized that it was us that did it. We didn't even know that we took their stuff down. We were just indiscriminately going after what we do on a daily basis. And we drew their fire, essentially, and ended up in this online fight between my team and them. Because, again, we were small enough to where we didn't have a PR team that said, don't reply, because the big guys never did. They just sort of dealt with it, moved on, because it's sort of like, don't give it any energy. Yep. But we were also tenacious enough to say, no, don't mess with us either. I mean, just because you guys think you're black hats, it doesn't mean we're not as formidable as you are. And so it ended up this pissing contest between me verbally, essentially, over these encrypted chat channels that were recorded that Parmy got a hold of for the book. And
wow.
I worked in symphony with law enforcement and the intelligence community to ultimately identify the folks. And they went down for coming after us. So they picked on the wrong group. Say safely. That worked out well.
Wrong victim selection in there.
Right.
That is
well said.
It's rare that we get that side of the coin in our world in infosec, that someone actually did something to make the bad guy's life miserable. Because you always hear about, it seems like, you turn on the TV, someone's got hit with ransomware, someone's got data stolen. It's a constant ongoing thing. Yeah. And you rarely do you hear, well, we went and nabbed like 30 people that were doing this, and we made their life hell, or we turned them against themselves. You just don't get that.
No, you don't. And it wasn't without damage and, kind of shrapnel in our direction. We had a lot. I mean, lot of worries about what was going to happen, because they were just like most of these cyber criminals and some of these actors that are, geared to be influencers. They're Twitter jockeys. I mean, they're gloating of what they've done. And part of the challenge that I had was, no, you don't get away with just going out there and blasting a bunch of garbage on the internet and through social media to get some more clout. So that's why I spoke up, which was really rare, and questionable, because it could have resulted in a really bad ending too. So we got very lucky. Thankfully, no one looked at us as a company that had been, attacked, which could have made us a pariah and toxic. So there was a lot of good maneuvering by my PR team that I did hire at the time to help me navigate those waters. And so very challenging period. Admittedly, I don't want to make it sound like it was easy. We went through a lot.
No, I believe it.
Yeah.
That's taking it on the chin, and
Mm-hmm.
really, you're putting yourself out there when you're
Right.
doing that. But that's I'm so glad that there's people like you out there that
Oh,
do
thank you
that.
very much. Yeah. I mean, and there's a lot of folks that, in the similar period, if you remember, this is ancient history now, but H.B. Gary going through a lot of trouble back
Yep.
earlier that year. Same group, didn't quite have the same outcome that we had with this group, but it was just happenstance and circumstances that led the way it did. But yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate because some very credible folks really got damaged in that process, in that period. We just happened to be one of the lucky ones.
So you've been in the counterintelligence game, which is a lot like it's a cat and mouse thing. And
Right.
take us into the minds of these bad actors. Are these just criminals, or are
Mm-hmm.
they getting state backing? Are they just after money, or is their intentions more nationally oriented, where they think they're doing something for a much larger cause? What's going on here, like by and large?
Yeah, so your question kind of covered the gamut of yes.
Yes to all of that.
Yes, but in different silos. So we can broadly divest groups into two, broadly speaking.
Okay.
One is a nation state actor that is a government funded or motivated group that has a very specific task in mind, usually is well funded, and we'll get into a little bit of the nuances there as well. And then there's the other side that's purely financially motivated. These are indeed cyber criminals that are gangs that have now become quite successful. And that's where ransomware lives, right? Because that's a big part of the equation today that everyone knows about. So it's, broadly speaking, those two. Now, I'm going to really throw a nice wrench in the system here. There's a lot of ties that bind those two groups together. It's a lot of cross-pollination between private sector and government groups. A lot of moonlighting going on. Government actors that are well-trained that do their day job for ex-government, but then go and do cybercrime in their evening side hustle. So, and maybe are endorsed to do it by the government they're working for. So it's incredibly intertwined. As far as the mind of the bad guys, this is really interesting. It's a great question. Some are purely just taking orders. They just, it's their job. They're former intelligence operatives that are now purely in front of a computer somewhere in some of the more nefarious nation state groups that we know about that are just doing their job, and they have a directive and they're going to achieve it.
They're following a mission that's been given to them.
Yes. And then there's nation state actors that are extremely patriotic and driven because they believe what they're doing is in the best interest of their country. So I'll speak about things like the CCP, for example, very specifically. That intelligence group in China is focused on doing right by their country. And there's a belief system in that region that is very focused on the idea that if you can't protect the intellectual property that you have, then you don't deserve it. So they're very motivated and driven, which is interesting because that
is an interesting quote.
Yeah. And it changes the dynamic of how you deal with them, because as a defender, you're kind of like the early young analysts and intelligence operatives I speak with kind of feel like it's a cartoon where the bad guys know they're bad guys and they're, we're going to get They're not like that. They really believe they're doing right in many cases. And so they're as motivated and war heroes in their minds as I think we are on the defender side. So it's extremely challenging when you look at it that way, because they're not going to stop because you kind of embarrass them.
No, they won't. They got a much larger cause that's not going to die.
Right. And then there's the last sort of other side again, which is these take ransomware groups like Conti Group. My goodness, these guys have made billions of dollars. So if patriotism isn't their motivator, billions of dollars are, right? So the minds of these guys are just like any other human being that is now absolutely, either driven with full steam ahead because of some patriotic mission, or they're incredibly, incredibly wealthy now and are becoming sort of cyber oligarchs of their own. And they're commanding incredible amounts of power that they're addicted to. So the battle is tough because it's not unlike what you see with the old school DEA and the cartels. It's a very similar problem that we're facing on a cyber front now.
Yeah, the thing was that when you look at these cyber criminals or you look at the cartels, in many instances, the heads of them were confined to a geography, or they're confined in their movement because we knew who they were. And if they crossed into a friendly nation, we would grab them.
Right.
So even though these people are getting the money, I don't know how you spend all that cash when
I don't think you do. Yeah.
When you really can't leave your protective state. That's so you wonder what's really going on. And are they then using those monies to fund other nefarious things that we don't know about?
Well, yes, exactly. I mean, the history repeats itself so clearly in my mind. You look at old school mafias, that resulted in things like Las Vegas manifesting. If you look at the history of Las Vegas, it's fascinating.
It's a fascinating story. Bugsy.
Very fascinating. Yeah. I was recently in Mexico and looking at all the incredible, amazing touristic environments that have come about that have probably been funded by cartels, right? It's a known quantity. So, not all of these cyber criminals are wearing leopard skin on a yacht in the south of France carrying an ocelot. You see those guys with
that guy went to prison.
The lime Lamborghini guy.
The lion Lamborghini guy. He went to prison.
Yeah, exactly. Now there are those that get everyone else in trouble and are the pariahs within the community of the bad guys, but they're the ones that are very quiet, very controlled, very methodical, and functioning more like a professional than you'd want to believe. So that's the other part of this, is that the ones that make the headlines like that, they may be capable and skilled, but they're not very smart as far as maintaining their operation. But there are ones that are indeed very capable, and you're never going to hear about them.
So what if we really go back to the fundamentals of infosec and look at the root causes, where gaps get created in the DNA of the OEMs, those providers? Is there anything that should be done, can be done at that DNA level, I'll call it that can really alter the game and make it incredibly difficult?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I always go back to this old modality of castle moat strategy and whack-a-mole, which is right.
That's
which
the prevalent majority.
Yeah, which is the problem, right? Because this idea, and I have one of my podcast episodes is about. I won't restate the whole podcast in this as an answer because people can go listen to this when they want. But I liken cybersecurity to one of three effectively kinds of defense mechanisms. One is a sea cucumber. Another is a turtle or armadillo. I'm in Texas, so I'll say armadillo. And then another kind is either like a porcupine or sea urchin. We need to strive to be more like a sea urchin or porcupine, not be a sea. And a sea cucumber, for those who don't know, its defense mechanism is to literally allow the predator to eat part of it, and hopefully the predator will leave enough of it alone so it can grow back. We're so pathetically on that side rather than the other. That's the problem. And then that's sort of just the general modality of the way we address things, which is to be defensive, not offensive in our protection, which is interesting.
Okay.
The other problem is the lack of ability to understand when things manifest, because you're essentially little Dutch boy with a lot of holes and too few fingers, frankly. And the issue is inevitably believing, like Kevin Mandiant, who's hugely inspirational to me and a very good friend, has been saying this for many, many years. It's not about if, it's when. And now the phrasing's changed to not when, but how long. It's not even about when. It's now, well, how long has it been there, and how long has it been dwelling within your environment? That's the problem. The longer something has the means to do reconnaissance within your environment, the more disadvantaged you're going to be. Most cybersecurity professionals know less about their network than cyber criminals do that have been lurking there for months. Those guys have better mappings of networks than usually the actual security team do themselves.
The Secret Service asks, that is one of the two questions that they ask. when they get involved with a crime of this nature is, do you have a detailed network diagram and know all the assets that are in place and where
Right.
they sit? And the overwhelming majority of the time, the answer to that is no.
Sure. And it's not a fault of the people either. It's very hard, understandably.
It is extremely hard. But then given that, how do you reduce the dwell time? And I guess the second follow-up to that is, why don't SOCs catch this on a telemetry base? Like, they're deploying all these tools out there. Why isn't that data picking up on the silent outlier?
Well, yeah, and it's very, very broad, and pretty much the remainder of this conversation could be this answer. To be fair,
well, but we got 20 minutes, so
yeah, we'll keep it concise. But I will say the number one challenge is that the adversary that they're looking for doesn't look like an adversary. It's usually something that social engineered its way into the environment and looks like a credible user. This is one thing I get a lot of pushback on, because no one wants to believe what I'm saying. Is I'm a big proponent of saying it's not about vulnerability, it's about compromise. I say this a ton because there's a huge divide between the folks that think if I just patch up all the vulnerabilities, I'm good. And I'm like, no, because the adversaries that you're worried about are not going to be leveraging those vulnerabilities. They're going to be getting in and acting as if they have purpose to be there. They're going to privilege escalate themselves into the environment. And no security tool in the world, I don't care what it is or who's running it or who's built it, will trump a valuable business operation, because you'll get thrown out the door. CISOs get fired for that all the time. So that's exactly what these adversaries are leveraging. They're making their operations look like they're legitimately supposed to be happening in these companies, which is what increases the dwell time.
So how the hell do you cut that down then? Where does one go to get the intelligence? And I'm teeing you up for this one.
Yeah.
That's a great question. That how do I know I'm a target? Or how do I know that someone this is a possibility? Because one of the things we get from a lot of business, and now understand, we're down market. So we're small, medium business. And I don't mean down market in a negative way. We're just not in the enterprise. And those people are like, well, we're just so small. Who cares? Nobody cares about us. What are they going to get out of us? I make paper plates for Dixie. Right. Who cares?
Yeah, you make paper plates for Coca-Cola, which is exactly the target they're going to use you to get into.
That's what.
Yeah, exactly. And the way you reduce it, in a way, there's many ways, but one of the ways I obviously am a huge fan of is being able to watch the egress traffic from your network, not constantly staring at the front door where you think someone's going to be coming in and barring the door and having a laser grid in front of it. What is slowly and quietly leaving out of your network? If people paid more attention to their DNS queries and had DNS logs and looked at all the bizarre locations that the machines in their company were going to, and even just broadly cross-referenced the egress traffic to a known bad list of C2s or domains, you wouldn't believe what they'd catch. No one thinks about egress. Everyone thinks about ingress. Still, 27 years later in my career.
Absolutely. And I agree with that. But now the difficulty, I guess a question on that regard is, you look at the timing of these communications. A lot of times when you're looking for the egress, these guys are going to make that communication so spaced out, the frequency will not be consistent. If you're in the SOC looking for that signal, you almost have to have a hunch that looks bad.
You're right.
Right.
Yeah.
How do you?
You have to have an aperture, to your point, that is broad enough and wide enough to see that pattern manifest that no security tool on the inside is necessarily able to see, which is exactly what inspired me to build the company that I have now, which is that if I can look at 6 months of egress traffic, because what I'm doing is collecting the traffic from where the adversary sits, which is the convergence point. I'm not trying to catch all the victims by running to all the victims to see what's wrong with them. I'm waiting to see what the bottleneck is for that traffic, which is where the adversary sits. And that lets me see who's infected, and then what the cadence and frequency and velocity is of that beaconing from their environment. So if it's 1 week, I see the beacon happen every week. If it's every 2 hours, I see it every 2 hours. If it's just every 3 months, I still see it every 3 months. So that gives you an interesting perspective and has been a very hard thing for getting a lot of people to understand what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, because it seems sci-fi like. But
it does. I would be curious how you're getting the telemetry on that. So Prevailion is your, I guess to oversimplify it, you've infiltrated their infrastructure and you're listening.
100% correct. Yes, that's exactly right. So I'm sitting there as a small little spy within their environment to see who they've infected, which allows me to transfer that information back to the victim or tell the paper plate company that they are infected and will inevitably be a hop point into, we used a big soda maker as an example.
Big soda maker. Yeah. It's a great example because there's a lot of these megacorps have many small vendors, and the supply chain, to me, that third party risk is a great gap or vulnerability to go and exploit. That's right. They're your conduit in.
That's exactly it. It's the easy access in, because if you're going against all the security infrastructure that's been built up by an enterprise, but when you have one trusted channel of communication in, even if it's email from your third party partner, that's a supply chain attack. An email that comes from a small company to a big one is literally a supply chain attack. It counts as that.
Exactly. So, and I take it the bad guys have the same issues in detecting you that we have in detecting them. So it's not obvious to them.
That's right. They have the same, we impose a cost incursion onto their profit center by doing what we do, which is the way to get them to stop, actually, financially impacting them.
Do you get threatened by these folks? I was going to say, I mean, they can't be taking this very lightly.
No, they don't like what I'm doing at all. Yes. So no easy answer on this one. I have to be careful. There's also a certain amount of, I have to decide when not to do certain things. There's other challenges I have in my business as well, by the way, which is that sometimes operations that are meant to be happening, otherwise known as intelligence community operations, I can't tell the difference between that and an adversary environment sometimes. And so I have to make a really tough call on letting something be when I have a hunch that it might be an intelligence community effort versus a bad guy's effort. So we all kind of step on each other's toes sometimes. So bad guys, private sector companies like mine that are intelligence operations that are private, and then actual government intelligence operations that are legitimate but look really, really bad. So, and then we look bad to them. So we get chased around by the good guys sometimes, going, that Prevailion stuff, they don't know it's us. They think it's a bad guy. So we're constantly, there's no good communication, just like what the government has to deal with. There's not any better communication between private and public sector either. So yes, it complicates and compounds the problem even further with the threat factor, which is the last thing I want to do is irritate an intelligence community partner alongside irritating a foreign national government adversary.
Oh, I think what the GRU had 5,000 PhDs, something in that neighborhood, that wake up every morning trying to figure out how they can destroy a computer system. So that's an adversary you don't really let sleeping dogs lie, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
With that.
Yeah.
So I know this is going to be a sensitive question. So if you can't answer it, that's great. But is there any clue you can provide? How are you getting the telemetry? I mean, how's Prevailion doing this? Like, and you're not wearing orange. So
true.
So
So it goes back quite a ways. I mentioned earlier in the conversation, I was part of an effort, public-private sector effort back in the 2008-2009 timeframe. And in that timeframe, I was able to establish relationships and a methodology that allowed me to infiltrate and quietly and silently reside within some of these environments. And that is a capability that I kept fostering and growing and nurturing. And now I have this incredibly vast connectivity network that allows me to get that intel. So it is proprietary. So to be clear, I'm not just going scanning through IOCs or open source intel and figuring this out. I'm not looking at net flow, which is what most people are thinking I'm doing by now. They're listening to this that
Yeah.
know kind of how this works. That's not what I'm doing. I'm not looking at passive DNS and making some sort of inference that it's malicious. I'm actually seeing the beacon come from the malware in an environment to its command and control environment, because I am becoming part of that fabric of the adversary. And that is a very interesting way to do it.
You remind me a lot of the Cold War days when we actually had real humans in the field that became the fabric of another nation's infrastructure. And that's how we gathered real intelligence.
Exactly right.
It wasn't just from spy satellites or drones, but it was actually people building relationships.
Yes. That's exactly it. To use the terminology, I'm probably as close to real human in the SIGINT world as you get. So yeah, in a lot of ways. But that's well said. I use Cold War analogies a ton, by the way, in my conversations with folks, so they can understand what I'm talking about.
So, speaking of which, when you look at the Cold War, there was always this whole concept of mutually assured destruction. When we look at the capabilities of cyber malfeasance, bad actors, and what they can do, is it real that the capability exists to completely shut down a nation's infrastructure?
Yes, the answer is yes. Now, it's not as simple as I think people have made it sound that it is. I mean, the threat is there. In fact, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No,
I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. It's really fascinating. This is actually a good part of the conversation I had with Rob Lee from Dragos, because he's incredibly tuned in to this particular issue, right? Because his firm is explicitly focused on ICS and industrial control systems and operational technology. And we got in this conversation because he actually said something very positive, which I liked. It was a nice change. It was a departure from the normal doom and gloom, which is we're all screwed. This is all over.
Yeah.
The power grids are one ping away from going down.
Or one solar flare, which we can't do much about.
There you go. Exactly.
Separate
when the sun
topic.
Starts to hack you, it's over. Yeah.
It's over. Yeah. But
yeah. But his point was that, look, we do a fairly good job of defending in that regard. But he did concede, and he agreed with me that unfortunately a motivated group that wants to come in and do some serious damage. I mean, look, he admittedly knows that he wouldn't be in business if this wasn't a legitimate problem. That there was a real viable scenario where, and I'm going to use the good old buzzword here, but the asymmetry of the adversary is real. They really do have an advantage in that they can keep trying and failing while we can only fail once. And that's kind of where that lies. And that could be across critical infrastructure, financial, health care, government. It's the same problem across all of those verticals.
Yeah. And, it's a scary thought that, if the lights go out, well, then as a nation, we got very serious issues at multiple levels, where we no longer have that backup infrastructure that's not reliant on the net communications to function. It's gone at this point.
Yeah, we paint ourselves into a bit of a corner now. You're right.
We have, and I wish, if we turn back the clock to the Great Depression, those guys were tough. If you killed the power on them, they'd be like, "Screw you, I don't care."
Yeah, light up a candle and get cooking.
Get cooking, right? I don't think that's going to happen in this. Another topic in the short time that we have that I know you're just going to be able to scratch the surface on, but the polymorphism of malware. I'd love for you to explain that to our listeners, because it's a fascinating topic.
Sure.
As to what's happened, and it's real. It's so.
Yeah. I mean, I'll date myself with this answer. Everyone remembers the movie Terminator, and then probably even more more succinctly, Terminator 2, when the famous one where that Mercury-looking guy showed up, that was like a policeman, and kept changing his appearance to avoid detection and move through, the society unfound and whatnot, and could basically completely make his way seamlessly from one place to another. That's essentially polymorphism. That's what that is. That's literally the ability for something to change its signature. Because as we all know, I think who's listening that are in cybersecurity, we're still fundamentally on a very, very basic concept around identification based on signature or anomaly.
Sure.
Baseline being breached or broken, that gives you some tendency to say there's an outlier, to your point earlier, versus this is a signature of something that's malicious, literally a hash of a binary that you can go track. Polymorphism really is just this methodology that threat actors have employed very successfully, which is to change the DNA of their tool, otherwise known as malware or whatever they're using, on the fly.
Yep.
Now, what's interesting about this is that it goes back to my methodology, which is that if a spy or malware, to use a Cold War analogy, cannot communicate and get directives from headquarters or its controller or its command and control to change its DNA, or if it doesn't have any kind of predestined timing for it, it'll get caught. So if you can stifle and muzzle a spy, I don't care if they're in the Oval Office, if they can't communicate out from there, they're essentially nullified and now inert, because now you can catch them before they have the means to communicate, and they won't change their appearance because they won't be given the directive to do so. So that ability to communicate outbound again and get directives and new versions of itself, that's a big part of this polymorphism, which is it'll download another binary updated version, which will now have a different hash that the AV or the EDR, the XDR, whatever, doesn't have in its systems to identify it. So it gets away with murder. That's what that is.
Yeah, and we see this all the time. You know, you might find a malware variant, but that spawned off a bunch of ancillary processes that you won't see unless you're really threat hunting and you're looking for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you have to know what you're looking for, and you don't know what you don't know. So what you need is something that will trigger a tip and cue you to something that you didn't realize was malicious, that maybe is there the whole time that you assumed was benign, but gives you new information, new intelligence that changes the game for you, and that's the key.
Now, this last question, because I know we're running out of time, but this is why we haven't even gotten halfway through.
No,
but that's good. So, AI, do you see the evolution of malware merging with AI where it can become like a real cancer? Cancer doesn't phone home. It evolves, it destroys the body from the inside out. Can that be done? Are you?
Yes.
So it doesn't phone home anymore.
No, it'll eventually have enough decision support internally to be clear, it'll inevitably always have to exfil intel to be useful, unless it's built for sabotage. So I want to be clear.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, if its entire purpose is to destroy, and it's never, once it's released, it's on its own. Its purpose is massive disruption at whatever it can do.
Yes. If we could take Stuxnet and fast forward 5-10 years from now, it would be entirely self-reliant and would have probably continued on its rampage to do more damage wherever it was intended to go, and along with everything else that's out there. So yes, I completely believe that they're going to start to build things that are entirely automated and don't need, as I put it today, directives and orders from headquarters to achieve its goal. The key will be, will it be smart enough, and will it use machine learning and neural networking capabilities and AI essentially to figure new ways out that maybe it would never have found today without some sort of advice from its C2? Probably. So there's a chance that the AI will also add to the context of wormability of something as well. Let me go find new methods and conduits that I wasn't even programmed for propagating myself. That could be something that could happen as well with AI. So it's AI by definition is meant to come up with new parameters that were not formally there. And that by definition, that statement alone is absolutely horrifying when you start thinking about threats.
Yeah, that's a very scary thought. So, and it's not science fiction. So having someone like you actually give it seriousness, hopefully people are listening and they start thinking about it.
Yeah.
So Karim, we're in the last couple minutes here. I want to give you the floor. Is there anything you want to plug? Any things you're up to? Any events, books, any appearances you want to talk about? Whatever you like. Charities, it doesn't matter.
Oh, very, very kind. Honestly, I've got my heads down doing exactly what we talked about through this podcast, which has been wonderful. Thank you for it. I would definitely recommend for those who are interested in my background and a little bit of my story, whether it's purely cybersecurity interests or just general entrepreneurialism, go find my podcast. It is actually really fun to listen to. I don't have a real agenda there. I'm not advertising on it or anything yet. Maybe if it gets big enough, I'll do that. But it is the Introverted Iconoclast. I have it at theintrovertediconoclast.com, but you can also find it on Apple and Spotify and just about everywhere. So it's there. As far as other events and things like that I'm going to be doing, nothing immediate. But stay tuned because I do have some announcements probably coming up in the next month or so.
Well, if you have any big ones, please, you're always welcome to come back. And
thank you.
We'd be glad to have you. And we'll put the links in the show notes back to your podcast.
Wonderful. So, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much, Karim. This has been a fascinating conversation. Take care.
You too.